Hi, this is Dr. Carlos Yebra López,
And this is Dr. Usman Chohan.
and we just dropped Critical Polyglot Studies, the first systematic and critical analysis of polyglots, polyglossia, and languages, now available including an open access chapter number 3 about the polyglot industry.
Looking forward to your feedback and your comments. Hello and welcome back. It's Dr. Usman Chohan with Dr. Carlos Yebra López. We are both co-authors of this new book, Critical Polyglot Studies. It's something very exciting we're celebrating, and now we're talking about part 2. So put on your trench coat like Morpheus or Neo or Trinity, whatever you identify with, because we're going to draw this parallel with the Matrix. Carlos, we are talking about a certain sphere that is put before our eyes to conceal us from the truth, something like what Morpheus said regarding the polyglot industry. What are we talking about? What does this polyglot industry do, and how do the edges of that diamond, you previously had mentioned there's 4 corners to it, 4 agents in it, they connect and then they reinforce that industry, so the industry feeds the matrix and then draws upon the forces of that matrix. What is this dynamic? What are we talking about?
Let's break it down then. What is the polyglot industry? As we said, is the ensemble of 4 sectors which are mutually reinforcing. First sector, social media platforms. Second sector, language learning applications. And then you have polyglot gatherings and meetings and the print media. So within the social media sector, YouTube is the key piece. That's where the first videos from polyglots start, notably a famous subgenre, which goes as follows. A person performs the same message in different languages, therefore showing their ability to speak those fluently, thus qualifying as a polyglot and showcasing that to the world, either to demonstrate their ability and or to inspire others to do the same. That's the seminal moment of the polyglot community / industry. Now, as YouTube becomes commercialized with ads, monetization, etc., so does the whole of the internet and the polyglot community itself, thus turning into an industry. Then you have language learning applications, the most famous of which is, of course, Duolingo. Duolingo is very much representative and emblematic of how other language learning applications work, whether those are Busuu or Memrise, Bubble, etc. And they all kind of have a similar format. They focus on 10 quote-unquote major or modern languages, and they are premised on gamification, on turning language learning into a game where you accumulate XPs and rewards, and you can compete with other users. And all of them represent language as disembedded from the social context. In other words, you don't need to interact with other people to learn the language. It's something that you can break down and play as a video game at home. Then the third sector is the polyglot gatherings and meetings. Are these the same? Not really. The polyglot gatherings are typically annual or biannual, and we're making here reference to, of course, the polyglot gathering, the polyglot conference, and to a lesser extent to the language event. Now, we argue in the book that the Polyglot Conference is within a tension between the polyglot community and the polyglot industry, whereas we place the polyglot gathering more so at the core of the polyglot industry. And then finally, we have polyglot meetings. Those are weekly. Typically, Mundolingo is the most famous one. And the last sector would be the print media. The print media is centered around the ebook as part of the polyglot hassle. And the ebook is really the product that is representative of that sector, where YouTube polyglots who are typically not trained in linguistics share their quote-unquote original method to learn languages, which in fact is a rehashing of common sense and common methodologies that have been in the business for decades. So those are the 4 sectors of the polyglot industry. Would you like me to talk about how the polyglot matrix relates to that ensemble?
I would. In fact, before we do that, I would like to because we have it's a highbrow output. It's an academic output. It's very rigorous. It's very well researched. Let's take a moment to simplify this. Look at how, imagine you wake up every day like Neo in the Matrix does, and you see this world that is artificial. You feel something isn't right about it. Look at the direct. Let's simplify it for the audience. You wake up and you check your YouTube and you see learn Chinese in 5 days, learn Polish in 3 minutes, learn French in 3 seconds. It's so fucking ridiculous. That's the first part of what you experience. Then you're invited to these gatherings where you have very mixed results. You have some fantastic people, you also have some other people, and you have this sort of feeling that I don't know really what I'm getting out of this or what I'm doing. Like something isn't right. Where is the agenda being driven? Who is managing this? What is happening here? It may be good for some, it may be great for others, but there isn't something quite fitting in the mind. There's, like Morpheus said, a splinter in the mind, right? And that's the splinter that ekes out at you. Then you check out, let's open the New York Times, and they have this Sisyphean description of one heroic polyglot who mastered 510 million languages, and he's a heroic figure. Who the hell is this guy, and why is he being glorified in this manner? What is the narrative that is being presented to me? And you could go on, but within those four corners you have identified, and you say, is this what polyglossia is? Like, why is this being presented to me? Anybody who has come out of this with a unobscured mind will say, I'm not sure that this is how the world is supposed to be, and I'm not sure that my relationship with languages is supposed to be like this. That's why we draw the analogy with the matrix. So when you now talk about the polyglot matrix and its myths, what are those things? Before that, why did you connect this, or why did we connect this with the idea of the matrix? What is the analogy there?
Yes, the idea of the matrix, as you know, is a very potent metaphor and allegory for a number of phenomena. And it has become particularly salient in the domain of intersexual dynamics, as in the red pill community, etc. And that's not the way in which we intend the analogy. We draw rather upon a humanist tradition, which is Plato's allegory of the cave in Book 7 of the Republic. That's where we take it from, right? And we also take some aspects from the film. So from the combination of both aspects, we bring the matrix as an illuminating metaphor in the book. And there are a number of things that are illuminated. The first one is that we live in a simulated reality. We don't see languages for what they are. We don't see polyglots or polyglossia from what they are. We see representations of them, which are in the best interest of the industry. And those discursive representations which influence the industry and reinforce it are the polyglot matrix. And so the second aspect, which is crucial and illuminated by the matrix analogy, as in the film, is that the whole polyglot industry is only sustained with our attention, time, and energy, and money, of course. Attention, time, energy, and money. Remove those, and the batteries of the matrix become empty, and the whole thing collapses. Contained within this metaphor is the idea that it is really in our hands to become first educated as to the contours of the polyglot matrix and industry, and then to decide how much, if any, of this attention, time, money, energy we want to put into the matrix. And finally, the coup de grace is the fact that once you awake, once you realize how it works upon reading our chapter, then what follows is not some euphoric freedom, as in Plato's allegory of the cave. You get out of the cave and you see the sun, and that's all wonderful. No. The waking up is unsettling, is uncomfortable. That's why we said at the beginning in the first video, this book is meant to challenge your ego investments. You realize, well, I'm actually not a polyglot, as in an objective truth about myself. I don't even know what a language is, as a matter of fact. There are no native speakers. There are no absence of accents. What is this, right? And we establish in chapter 4 10 ideas that vehiculate this polyglot matrix. What are those 10 ideas? We present them, we expose them, dismantle them, and offer alternatives. These ideas are, number 1, native speakerism, the idea that there are native speakers and speakers who are not native. And the subsequent idea that those who are native are necessarily superior to those who are not native. We said this is all wrong. First, there are no native speakers. This is just an idealization, an abstraction. Nobody is born speaking any language whatsoever. And it has pernicious ideological connotations, including neo-racist overtones. Second, just because a language is your first language, not your native, your first language, it doesn't mean that you are automatically more proficient. As a matter of fact, most L1 speakers of languages do not have a C2 level of proficiency, because in addition to that being your first language, which helps but is not necessarily the cause of your proficiency, you also need to be highly educated in that language, and most people are not. That's the first myth. The second one is that only some speakers have an accent, and supposedly others don't. That's when somebody says, oh, do I hear an accent? Oh, do you have an accent? What's that accent from? It's like everybody has an accent, because accent just means intonation. So it's the very means by which we speak. So that speaking without an accent will be the equivalent of typing without a font. So when people say you have an accent, they mean your accent is not standardized. So the solution is not to make it standardized. The solution is to remove the prejudice about why an accent which is not standardized is equivalent to an accent at all. Then we have the idea of languages being foreign and other languages not being foreign. And that is very divisive, because it creates an artificial binary between foreign on the one hand and national on the other, therefore othering some speakers. In addition to that, we have the idea that languages are countable, from which code switching derives. And languages are not countable because they're not objective ensembles. You cannot say this is where a language starts as a set of lexicostructural aspects and this is where it ends, because languages are always already named after the fact as premised on socio-political reasons. Are Serbian and Slovenian different? Well, it depends on when you ask that question, to whom you ask. Are Catalan and Valencian different? It depends where you ask and to whom you ask. Why? Because ultimately it is a political decision. Yes, based on linguistic arguments, but the decision itself is political. So you cannot just presuppose that languages can be reduced to units and those units can be collected like Pokemons, right? Therefore, it follows that you cannot just switch between codes because those codes have not been clearly defined to begin with in linguistic terms. So we talk about alternative paradigms such as languaging and translanguaging. Then we have Neo-Worfianism, the idea that each language contains a different worldview, a different cognitive universe, so that when you learn Chinese, all of a sudden you understand the world in a radically different fashion. That sounds good. The only problem is it's not true. The only problem is that this is not backed up by significant evidence. Yes, learning languages gives you a different perspective, but it gives you a different perspective of the same reality, of the same world. It does not give you access to a different world. Then we have the myth that we think or dream in different languages, which is related to this Neo-Worfian assumption. And the idea is that once you have mastered the language you're learning to a sufficient degree, then you'll begin thinking in that language naturally. You'll begin even dreaming in that language. And that doesn't happen. It only feels as though we're thinking in a language or dreaming in a language. But the fact that it feels as though we're doing that doesn't mean that that's actually what is happening. As Steven Pinker argues, we think in a language of thought or mentalese, and then we label our thoughts in languages, in English, in Spanish, in Korean. And the language in which we first label those thoughts feels as though it is the vehicle of our thinking, hence the cognitive illusion that we think and or dream in languages. Then there is flagism, which is the assumption that there's a one-to-one correspondence between flags and languages. For instance, the Spanish flag represents Spanish, right? The German flag represents German. False. We know that within Spain we have many languages, one of which is Castilian, but there's also Galician, there's also Basque, Catalan, Valencian, and there are even diasporic non-territorial languages like Yiddish or Ladino, right? What is the flag that corresponds to those? Flags are also used for institutions like the EU. What is the language that corresponds univocally to the EU? Flags also have political implications. Do you really want to use a Kosovar flag in Serbia or a Taiwan flag in mainland China? Therefore, not only there is not a 100% empirical correlation between flags and languages, but it is also ideologically pernicious to assume that correlation. Then we have the idea that multilinguals are somehow exceptional. You know, the normal and the default option is to be a monolingual. If you know more than one language, wow, you really know more than one language, you must be very smart. What we don't realize is that most people speak more than one of what we conceptualize as languages. And we discriminate on the basis of class and race all the time. When somebody speaks two or more languages and belongs to the royal family, we say, wow, they're so smart. When they're poor, they're from Africa, we say, oh, you know, those people speak dialects or patois. This is the same linguistic phenomenon being conceptualized in different degrees of prestige based on political biases. Multilingualism is not the exception. It was always already the rule. It only looks as though monolingualism is the rule because we have internalized the prejudice that one nation should be equivalent to one state, which should be equivalent to one language. And finally, the idea that polyglots are necessarily more tolerant. If I speak 5 languages, therefore I must be more open-minded than somebody who only speaks one, and therefore more tolerant. Yes, there is a positive correlation between speaking several languages and having more cognitive and cultural tolerance. But correlation is not causation. There were a lot of members of the National Socialist Party in Germany who spoke several languages that did not make them any more tolerant. There's this trend called reactionary multilingualism, which is the use of languages for reactionary purposes, i.e. the opposite of tolerance. So the fact that you speak several languages does not automatically make you more tolerant. Those are the assumptions of the polyglot matrix.
Excellent. Now, given that you have shared the key myths propagated by the polyglot matrix, the polyglot industry feeds into this matrix, also draws from it. It is a reinforcement relationship both ways. I'm just going to summarize these 10 points because these are things worth thinking about. In your area of expertise, these things are well known, but when you look at the practitioner elements of polyglossia, in high PR otherwise, you do feel these every day, all the time, to various degrees, depending on how exposed one is. First thing you said, there's this idea of a native speaker. This is my native language. And therefore somebody else who is a non-native. This creates, opens a can of worms of problems. The second you said was that there is an accent thing. You have an accent. I don't have an accent when I talk. You sound funny. You have an accent. This is a can of worms. It's not even true. So everybody has an accent. Then there is the idea that there are like normal languages and then there are foreign languages. This is, just hearing it sounds awful, but we argue through why and what it means. The fourth is that you think in languages. This one is very captivating. It's very tantalizing because when you dream or you think, a daydream, for example, you feel that, well, I was clearly dreaming in English, but no, there is a mentalese that the brain pre-linguistically thinks about, and then it comes through. But you see this all the time in the manifestations of the polyglot industry, the 4 corners of the diamond that you've highlighted. You see it all the time being used, and tacitly it is very prevalent because so tantalizing is a possibility. Then there's the idea that is deep. It's like it's inextricable from something like Hypea, but other places as well. How many languages do you speak? Well, 4, 6. This is an act of condensing so much into discrete countable entities, which is not the reality of language. That's not how you add 7. That's not how it happens. Then the idea of code switching, you mentioned the neo-Worfianism. So, they have different perspectives because they have different reality. That's not how it actually works. Very exaggerated notion because it also is tantalizing. Then the obvious one, but people use this extraneously and, without any hesitation. This is the language. This is the flag. They go together. In fact, this is not how it happens. There's a deep political history behind that. We can explain it as we do in the book. And finally, there's 2 points. Polyglots must be more tolerant because they know more languages. That's not quite the case because you can speak a lot of languages and be very intolerant, and vice versa.
And even we argue that it makes you more intolerant towards people who only speak one language.
Yes, it also makes you intolerant towards monolinguals as well.
Mhm.
And the last point is that there's multilingual exceptionalism, that wow, you went ahead and learned 5 languages, because that's not normal, it's exceptional. Actually, in the world, speaking multiple languages is the norm. And if you speak one language, that is actually the exception. That's because of the nation state, one nation, one state, one language kind of stuff. These all fall within a matrix. And these are things that if you engage with polyglossia without an awareness, a criticality, you will think that these are truths. They're self-evident truths, but they're not. That's why when we go from chapters 2 to 3 to 4, this is what we are unraveling. Now, in the next part of our interview, we will be discussing how critical polyglot studies deals with this. What is this new subdiscipline to which we have given life?
Absolutely.
Thank you.